Today, we are venturing beyond the well-trodden paths of traditional management and diving into the human hearts of corporate culture, guided by the insights of cultural anthropology, which is news for me. Think about it. Behavioral economics has constantly shown us that we are not the rational actors we believe ourselves to be. Online purchasing patterns and social media activity reveal predictable irrationalities, exposing the limitation of traditional economic models to explain that. And then there is the replication crisis in psychology, which has shaken the foundations of established theories about human behavior, reminding us that context and variability are super important. In the corporate world, this lack of understanding translates to significant challenges for corporations. There is Deloitte saying that 94% of executives recognize that it is important to have a strong workplace culture. Nevertheless, there is another like a Gallup report saying that only 15% of employees are truly engaged. This disconnect is a stark reminder that we often fail to grasp the human element that drives organizational success. But today we are very lucky to have Dr. Kristine Gentry, a distinguished cultural anthropologist, to illuminate these complexities. We are going to be exploring how anthropological methods can help us decode the hidden language of corporate cultures, understand the role of ritual and symbolism, and navigate the challenges of the remote work. We are going to also to dive into the common pitfalls of cultural challenges and cultural change, and most importantly, gain practical advice for creating more positive and effective workplaces. Sorry for that again. We were talking about it, Kristine, that we should avoid just pronouncing complicated words, and suddenly I do it. Isn't it incredible?
Yes.
I'm really glad to have you with me because this is going to be an interesting discussion, especially for me, because I don't know a damn thing about anthropology. You hear about it, but never I have heard it applied into the cultural workplace. Kristine, how did it come that from your doctorate in anthropology, you ended up helping corporate organizations? What happened? What moved?
That's a great question. So yeah, I studied anthropology, which for people who don't know is the study of cultures, and I focused on cultural anthropology, which is a subfield. There's four in anthropology that's specifically on cultures and um, both past and present cultures, right? And so when I was in academia and going through grad school, I wanted to go to a school and do training in applied anthropology so that if I decided to leave academia or couldn't get a good job in academia, I could do something with anthropology. And actually, at the time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to, be in industry or other work using anthropology or if I wanted to teach about it in academia. So I, as I finished my PhD, I kind of ended up on the academic career path, which is what happens when you're in PhD. That's where everyone's going, right? But it's really hard to get good tenure track jobs in anthropology. And so I did a full-time teaching position at Auburn University for 3 years, but I wasn't tenure track and I was on that market still. And I told myself I'll do this for 3 years. And if I don't get a good job, then I'm going to do something different. And that's exactly what I did. I decided to leave, do something different, and I ended up kind of eventually, after a couple of years, working for a consulting firm in Houston, Texas. It's a boutique consulting firm where I headed up their research practice. So they hired me. They actually had read an article about we need anthropologists in business. They're great, different perspective and great consulting firms will hire anthropologists. Lucky for me, because then I got a job there. But and they brought me in really first to help with their research, and I developed, their research programs. And while I was doing that, I worked with an organizational psychologist who we had developed workshops where we would go into companies and help them identify their values and their core competencies. And then he was putting together interviewing guides and performance management guides. And we had a whole design, team. So they were these really pretty guides that would sit in the HR office And I thought, this is cool, but like the people, nobody knows what these values and behaviors are because we haven't communicated them to the people in all these organizations. So I said, we need to do something to communicate this and make these values and behaviors come to life for the employees because they're getting evaluated and they don't even know what they are. So we started creating culture change programs where we, took the values, can combined them with the behavior, and then created communications programs around that, rewards and recognitions. We did even, I worked for a company that had great designers. So we did a lot of environmental design work to help reinforce, the symbolism, to reinforce the message of what these values were. But really, we were creating programs to help bring the values and behaviors to life that they wanted. So it sort of evolved naturally. It wasn't even something when I got hired at the consulting firm, I had not ever thought I want to go work for a consulting firm. I just applied for a job and I talked to them and it sounded cool and I did it. So it was just kind of where life took me.
You have used a word that you almost never hear from app psychologists. You know that these HR people, 60%, they have a degree in psychology, at least in Europe.
Mhm.
And you have used the word symbolism. They never use that. How is it different, this perspective of app psychologists towards culture versus an anthropologist versus the culture in an organization? How is it different?
I think that's a good question. When psychologists talk about culture, they're really looking at it from a perspective of organization and, behaviors. And I feel like it's more clinical. I think they're taking kind of the clinical thing and like here we hire people with these values and we evaluate them on their values and that's kind of it, right? And they don't talk about how do we teach them the values. That's the part that an anthropologist, I would bring because in anthropology, and the reason my anthropology, like I'm an authority on culture, is because anthropology is a discipline that came up with the concept of culture. So when anthropology first started, it was colonialists going out, colonizing the world, and encountering different people and going, oh, wow, they are so different from us. And what is this thing that makes them so different? And they created the concept or named the concept of culture because it existed, right? It just hadn't been named and defined it and started studying it and studying why culture, how much culture impacts us as humans. I mean, culture is about what we believe, it's about what we value, and it's how we act. And so, culture shapes everything we do. It's anything we learn as part of our culture. So, the anthropological perspective of culture is a really holistic, where I think a psychologist perspective is they think about the individual and then they think about the collective. And it's what can we do at the collective level to, I don't know, it's just more clinical. We'll hire people, we'll evaluate them, and that's it. Like I don't think it goes at least traditionally didn't go a whole lot beyond that. I think the ideas of organizational psychology and organizational culture are evolving. But the anthropological perspective is just one of the main things about culture we talk about is how holistic it is, and everything is connected in our cultures. So when we study other cultures, we look at how the economic system and the religious system intertwine, and they impact ideas about family and property and who can marry who and who is considered family, all these things. It's all connected. And you can't change one part of culture without understanding how it's all connected and why it's connected to be able to address, say some problem, right? And that's how I look at it in a organization as well and company cultures. And I've always done problem solving that way, where, no matter what the problem is, someone comes to me and they'll say, we have to solve this problem. And I want to learn more. Like my instinct first is let's really understand the problem because you can't change or address a problem if you don't understand it. Where I've worked on many, many teams where the other people's instinct is like, God, I don't know how to solve this problem. I don't know what you want me to do, but okay, I'll go write a video script or I'll come up with a marketing campaign or I'll, whatever they're going to do, but they know they have a million questions. They just don't take the time to stop and answer those questions. Whereas an anthropologist, I mean, we always start with research, right? That's what anthropology is about, doing research to understand the culture. So the first thing I do in a company is understand the current state of their culture because to get to some desired future state, you've got to know what's going on right now.
You know what? You made me think about something that finally I understood. Is like, yes, the psychologists are going to try to understand what happens in the brains, the reactions that we have towards stimuli from outside. But you guys are going to look at the stimuli outside, what happens in the surrounding, in the context. And that's what you mean by holistic, I have the impression.
Yes, yes, you're right. It's understanding all the outside, all the different things that impact people. So in an organizational culture, I mean, well, it's everything. It's the environment you work in, whether it's your home or an office. It's the power structures. It's, how do you have meetings? How do you get rewarded? What's rewarded? What behaviors are allowed or not allowed? It's just this whole entire context where I think psychologists are going to be more focused on specific things, not looking at the big picture.
Hmm. And there is another parallel that came to my head. Uh, I'm a little bit of a geek, Christine, so I have to put it in the context. Like there is a similarity between what math is for the rest of the sciences or engineering, and what anthropology could be for the rest of human science. It's like the basis of the language of other sciences. And that's something that just came to my mind right now. If you know math, you can speak the other language. If you know anthropology, how do we humans react collectively towards external stimuli? We can understand a lot of the shit that we do.
Yeah, I love it put that way. I've never heard of it. That's a great analogy though. Because anthropology is so holistic, all-encompassing, you've got it and you've got to understand all these little things that impact our behavior. So yeah, and one of the big debates in anthropology is about what is the most impactful, like what drives culture. So there's some people who say it's economics, some people say it's religion, some people say it's environment, and there are different theoretical perspectives in anthropology arguing which one is foundational. Personally, I lean to the economics, but the environment is very much shapes your economics. And then I think the religion is created out of your environment and your economic situation together. So they all three are very closely related. And when we look at cultural differences, you can see that and how those three impact so much else. But yeah, it's an interesting theoretical debate in anthropology of kind of which came first. It's sort of a chicken and the egg, I think.
Yeah. If we go into the practical application of anthropology into work culture, what do you feel is the what is the unique methodologies that anthropologists will follow to understand and also nudge, in fact, a change in corporate culture? If you compare it versus the traditional change management expert who knows about this ADKAR methodology process, I don't even know how it's called nowadays. What would you do differently?
So that's a great question. And I think um, we do a lot of things differently, and it's what makes it, really important. But our basic fundamental research methods is called it's called ethnography. We use ethnographic research methods. And what that means is really understanding the cultures that we're studying. So for anthropology developed ethnography. I don't know if you've heard of it before. It's becoming a buzzword. Sociologists use it now, user research, design thinking, all these people use it. And all of those are ticking. I mean, they've adopted a core method of anthropology kind of as their own. Same with, I was going to say, ADKAR. When I read about change management theories, I'm like, oh, this is a condensed version of anthropology. Like they really took, a couple of classes of anthropology and just said, okay, this is what we're going to turn into a research method. It's not different. We just go a lot deeper. So like I was telling someone the other day, they said, do you have your change management certification? I was like, no, but I have a PhD in anthropology. And
Yeah.
change management is like this much of what I learned. Um, I have a way broader, um, knowledge base about it than just that little piece. But they took methods, all of these disciplines have taken methods from anthropology and adopted them and renamed them and try to make them sound really cool. But so we use ethnographic research methods to really understand the cultures that we're studying. And that means doing something that we call participant observation, which is, you know, being in and with the people you're studying and living or, in an office observing meetings, being there when, I've shadowed nurses before, obviously, and I'm not participating, but I'm following them during while they do their job and I'm taking notes and I'm, recording everything they do and then asking questions later. That's participant observation in the workplace. We do what we call key informant interviews, which is talking to someone, and usually you go really deep on what they know, their specialty, and what you want to learn about their specialty. So, in the case of a nurse research project I did with nurses, it was just asking them about their day. What do they do day to day? How is their time spent? Because the project was trying to figure out what do nurses spend all their time on and how can we get them working at the top of their license rather than doing so much, like nurses take care of so many tasks of just keeping a patient comfortable that really don't have anything to do with medicine. Um, and so spending time with them is how we figured out where we could make some changes with that. So the interviews, prisoner observation, and then storytelling, which is both collecting stories from the cultures we're studying, but also resharing stories as a way to change values and behaviors. And the one thing I'll say about ethnography, when I hear other people doing ethnography, they'll say, "Oh, we're going to do this ethnographic study, and we'll go talk to people one day and spend a couple hours on site with them." And in anthropology, in academia, and ethnography is a year-long study of a particular group of people, at a minimum. You cannot call yourself, say you're doing ethnography if you don't spend at least a year studying people. Obviously, we can't do that in business, but anyone who says they're going to do ethnography in a day or in a half day is raising red flags to me because you really don't, you're going to learn some stuff, but you may also make mischaracterizations because you don't know enough. You know enough to be dangerous. Like you see how this one team function and you decide, oh, well, this is the company culture. Well, maybe it's a messed up team. Maybe it's a really high performing team and the rest of the culture doesn't do that. I mean, you just don't have enough information. So I caution people that if someone says they're going to do ethnography, you need to ask, like, how much time are they actually going to spend? We obviously can't spend a year, but you want multiple visits and conversations with people at all different levels too. I've talked to companies, worked with companies where they say, "Oh, yes, you can interview everyone in our C-suite." And I said, "Well, okay, that's great. We get an idea of what your leaders think of your company, but we don't know what anyone who works there thinks about your company. We need to talk to people at all different levels because I've been in wonderful companies that are so focused on, having a great safety culture and all the C-suites on board and they love their safety culture. And then you go visit the people out in the field who are doing the work and they're like, safety? What are you talking about? We've never heard them say anything about safety. All they tell us is, production, keep, let's make money." So that's part of the anthropological method is really getting in, talking to everyone to see what's really happening and where there's a difference between what we say we're doing in a culture and what's actually happening. And a lot of times there's a huge disconnect between what you say is happening, what even leadership thinks is happening, and what's happening on the front line.
Hmm. You got me. There was a particular thing that you mentioned that got me thinking. So this observation, which is part of the methodology. And then I was thinking about this famous I think it's called the Heisenberg paradox, where when you are observing something, you influence the measure. Like, was it Heisenberg? I hope that it was Heisenberg. Otherwise, I look dumb. Anyways, um,
Go with
so
it. I don't know.
so the idea is how do you do that while you're observing other people, you don't influence their behaviors because they're going to be, oh, I'm being looked, so I have to behave a little bit differently. I have to or if I am a leader, I have to behave what I mentioned to Kristine that I'm doing.
Mhm.
How do you
That's a
change?
really great question. And that's why, as anthropologists, we say you study for a year because people can't fake for a year, right?
Yeah.
They're gonna, and even in a business setting, eventually they get used to you there. I mean, with nurses, like following them through a busy shift, the first probably 10 minutes. They're a little awkward, and then they've got work to do and they're busy. And their only annoyance is like, are you still with me or not? Is there like they're running through the hospital literally, and I'm trying to keep up with them. Um, but people turn, usually if you're in a demanding job, right, you're going to focus in on your job and you kind of forget that this person is watching you. But so it does take time. And that's why I say, too, if you go to a place for one afternoon and you think you've got what people, the show they're putting on for you for that afternoon, right? That's exactly the point. You want to go and visit repeatedly. And then we also in anthropology have a process called triangulation. So if I notice something, observe something in one setting, you're looking for two other points to support that happen, rather than just saying, this person was so great at recognition and celebrating their employees. So this culture celebrates their employees. I need to see that that happens at least two other times in two totally different ways, unrelated, to make an assertion that this company is good at recognition, say. And honestly, three times isn't enough for that. But theoretically, there's this process of making sure you can support and back up what you're observing in other ways. So if I saw a leader recognizing someone in a meeting and I researched and read that they have a really great reward and recognition system, and then I see maybe a peer celebrating or recognizing someone else, that's now completely different ways I've seen reward and recognition in a culture, and I can say, oh, this company has a rewards and recognition program that seems to work, or at least they're implementing they're doing what they say they do. Whereas other places you might see rewards and recognition written down. You may know they hire a vendor and they have a way to recognize their people, but you can't find a single person who's ever been recognized using this great tool, right? So that's a culture that says they have something, they don't actually implement it.
Something that I truly believe in when you are changing cultures is this story about creating rituals. And the funny thing, Kristine, is that I remember that I have been reading some stuff about change management. They always forget it. It's like, yes, they have a plan in place, but no, rituals is not important. But I understand that in anthropology, rituals and symbolism it plays a big role, especially when you want to change a culture. Can you explain me a little bit more about what do you mean by ritual and symbolism?
Yeah, so rituals, I love that you asked this because you're right. Nobody talks about this. And this is part of what makes anthropology's perspective on culture unique, that people just forget about. So, rituals and symbolism are great ways to share your values and teach people how they're supposed to act. And rituals would be anything that is repeated, and it can be big or small, some kind of event that happens over and over. That has a meaning and it has a purpose. And the thing that happens about in company cultures is a lot of them have rituals, and they may not ever think about what are they teaching in the rituals, and the rituals may teach something they don't want to teach. So, for instance, say you're a company that again says you value rewards and recognition, and you have weekly stand-up meetings, and all you do in your weekly meeting is point out everyone who did something wrong. You don't ever celebrate success. Well, you're reinforcing a system of putting people down, and you are actually discouraging innovation because you're creating a system where people are afraid to make a mistake, right? Whereas if you have a company and in their standing meeting, they say, hey, this wonderful team came up with this great idea and they tried it out and it didn't work. But let's talk about what we learned from this and what we're going to do next time to try to see if we can't make this idea actually work. So you're celebrating the failure. That creates an environment where you can have innovation. So what happens in, say, standing meetings? I'm gonna use that because it's just a common thing, but people don't really consider what the impact of those standing meetings are. I've been in companies where the standing meeting is the leader talking for 2 hours about who knows what, and that's it. So what is the message the leader sending? I'm the person who knows everything. You guys sit and listen, and then when I'm done talking, you go work. On what? Like if that's a company that values collaboration, supposedly you've done nothing to show you value collaboration versus a leader that says, hey guys, we've got this deadline coming up. We've got a problem. I don't know how we're going to solve it. Give me some ideas. What should we do about this? How are we going to make this actually happen in the time frame we have? That's a company that's enforcing collaboration in their um, weekly stand-up meetings, whatever it is. So it can be even bigger. It can be, how you onboard. The onboarding is a ritual, and we know that company culture is influenced a lot by onboarding, but and individuals' success. I mean, people decide within the first several days if they're going to stay at your company or not, based on how those first days go. So if you have a really good ritual of onboarding where you're embedding your culture and you're showing people that you don't just have a rewards and recognition program, you actually use it. And you don't just say you have values on your website. People are taught how their actions are supposed to be guided by those values. You're being really specific in what you're teaching in your culture in that onboarding ritual, then you're going to be more successful. Or if your onboarding ritual is a bunch of Zoom videos that people watch from their home and then they take a test and then they got to figure out how to log into their email, you've sent quite a message about your culture, right? That may not be what you want to send. And then you try to get I don't know, the leader is now set the person who has to try to communicate a good culture to this person you've just really poorly onboarded. So rituals are a way we teach our values, and symbols are as well. And when we talk about symbolism and anthropology, we're talking about like physical symbols like our logos, branding, but we're also talking about our language and our behaviors because the way we talk symbolizes how we feel about things. So what you call your employees, do you call them resources? Do you call them team members? That symbolizes we think of you as an object we're making money off of, or we think of you as humans that we are working together with to achieve something. That's a team member. And people subconsciously, right? We come up with the words. We often don't think about the meaning of our words. So I guarantee if you talk to a CEO who, talks about human resources all the time and refers to people, more as objects rather than team members, they'd be like, what do I don't, that's not what I mean. And everybody knows it. They don't care. But subconsciously, you're sending a message, whether you want to admit it or not, you are sending a message. So our language and then our behaviors too can be symbolic, which is, things of, I mean, how do we greet people? What kind of message are we sending when we shake hands versus when you hug, or where people sit? That's in a meeting. I'm thinking of this is one of those kind of subconscious and unconscious aspects of cultures, power dynamics that we as anthropologists look at a lot and think about who has power and how is that symbolized in, say, a meeting room. And a lot of times it's symbolized by where people sit. Sometimes, like in Asian cultures, it's very clear, like the person with the most power. I mean, people sit in order of their power structure from the middle out. But in, the US, we're more subtle, but in a lot of places, the people with the most power sit at the head of the table. People with the least are further back. They're on they're not at the table. They're in the chairs behind, or they're standing, or, even who's in the meeting. These are behaviors that symbolize power. And they communicate messages of who has power. And a lot of our leaders don't think about that. We don't think about how we are communicating what we truly value to our employees. And that's where you get a lot of disconnect. So we say we value one thing, but our behaviors and our symbols and our rituals indicate we value something totally different.
I was just thinking, I mean, these rituals or symbols that you have in the workplace, I was just relating it to the type of rituals that I have at home when I'm sitting with my two daughters. So it cannot be that I mean, people recognize this in one shot, or we feel in a different atmosphere. If, for instance, I have certain rituals with my daughters to talk a little bit about rock. I love rock. To talk about silly movies that I have watched, and it's almost always the same, or having a deep conversation about a topic that we have heard in the news, even though they are still teens. So without these rituals, I mean, we wouldn't be the Palominos, so we would be something else. So we enjoy that while we're eating, having these three topics of conversations is like the natural thing to do in order to feel like relaxed, that I'm not at work, I am at home, protected by the love of my family. That's how we feel. It could be something really silly, like my stuff.
Yeah, no, that's such a great point. In all our subcultures, and we have rituals, and we don't often think of them as rituals. And some of our rituals are so symbolic. To me, some of the most fascinating ones in work or in healthcare. And once you read about a medical procedure as a ritual, it's so crazy. So if you think about when you go in for a medical procedure, no matter how minor, they make you take off all your clothes and put on a gown. And so you're totally vulnerable now, right? You're in this gown that doesn't cover anything. And then they put you in a bed and they wheel you into the room, whether you can walk or not. They don't care. They're going to wheel you in. And you're laying down and you can't talk and it's really cold and everyone's dressed, and everything's very sterile because it's separating you as a human with agency to the patient who's going to lay there and do nothing because these people are in charge and they're telling you what's going to happen. And they don't really tell you very much, right? They don't want you to know because you have no agency. For them, you're the body that they are fixing. And they don't really want to know much about you personally because they want to focus on the thing I do that they're fixing, right? They don't care about your personality or your kids or whoever. There's just so many steps, even from like putting on the bracelet, just all these rituals that create separation so that you can be this object that they're taking care of rather than a person.
Hmm.
Rituals, a lot of times they create meaning and separation. So the rituals of onboarding, like now you're an employee and you're part of this team rather than you're an individual person who's just joining a group, right? You're trying to become a part. I mean, a lot of company cultures actually, I mean, if they do it well, it's a little bit, cultish. Like we're indoctrinating you into our values and we want you to act in a certain way because you represent this culture. Um, there's a lot of, similarities to how cults are very extreme examples of cultures. I mean, they are a culture, right? But they have taken all these things about how we teach people what to value, what to believe, kind of to an extreme. But it's the same things. It's just hopefully we in our companies let people have some some freedom and agency while they're fitting into our company, right? And that's the only way you're going to have a company that can be innovative and creative. You have to leave some of that freedom. But in different companies, cultures, you don't want that, right? Like in the military, you don't want people to retain, most of your people, you don't want them to retain innovation. You want them to do things the way they're told to do so they survive. I mean, it's
Hmm.
part of war and military culture is very I mean they know in military they know how to do culture. They're very good at it. And there's a
Hmm.
lot of rituals and symbolism. You think the marching, the uniform, the even the basic training. I mean that's all a ritual to put you through this hard thing and change you so that you don't have any shred of individuality anymore. You're a team and you're working together and you're doing what the leader says. They're a good example of culture too.
I've been thinking that no matters if we call ourselves change experts, change is so bloody difficult at the individual level. So it's almost like we humans are not made for change. And I wanted to ask you, what are these common cultural barriers to change that you see the most often in corporations? What have you observed?
So, I mean, you're right. The one is complete resistance to change. People don't want to change. We like what's comfortable. We like doing the same old thing because it's easy. And actually, the more we learn about the brain, it's the way our brains work. Our brains want to conserve energy and do what's easy. And change means making your brain do something new and different. So it's very natural for people to resist change. And we see that a lot in company cultures. And that's why change efforts fail a lot. I mean, the change effort, like only 30% of change efforts are successful or something really low like that. So we have to address that concern about change and help people understand through rituals and symbolism and storytelling why the change is going to be beneficial for them as a person and not just for the company. And also help work them through the change, which is where you do the rewards and recognition to celebrate when people do things right. Because we all like that. Everybody wants to feel good, and we feel good when people say, "Hey, great job." And so you see someone else being recognized for doing great work and you go, oh, I can do that too. So we actually know how to create change, but we have to be really aware. And this is where, at Culture Grove and anthropologists, we know what the barriers are and we address those with our company, right? So it's the resistance to change. And in some case, whenever I go into culture, one of the things we ask people about is what is working really well here that you do not want to change? Because it's fine. Sometimes there may be something, maybe it's a tradition, a ritual, a process that maybe it's outdated and it's not the most, the latest technology or even the fastest way to do something, but it has some deep meaning and people really like it. So you don't want to change those things. You want to know, what do we need to protect in this culture? And we can say, hey, we're still going to keep the weekly happy hour, whatever it is, but we're going to add in some other things that are going to be different. So people can feel a little like, okay, they're not taking away all my fun or they're not changing all the things I like, right? So you kind of make incremental change. Too much change is hard for people. Another barrier to change is when leaders don't live the change, and I'm talking all the different levels of leadership. So I mentioned before, you can have a C-suite who's all on board with the change and they think it's great. And maybe in theory, they all think it's great, but they don't think, oh, I don't need to change my behavior. I don't need to act any differently. Everyone else does. Well, that's going to kill the change right there in the C-suite, right? You as the leader have to exhibit the change you want to have happen, but also whatever management levels you have, all of those levels of leaders have to be on board with the change. And a lot of times, companies don't spend enough time getting those people on board with the change. So you may have a wonderful culture change team. Maybe it's your change management team and they're sending out all this great communications and they've got great activities for managers to use with their team to teach about the values and even rewards and recognition. But the managers get the email about it and they go, oh, I have too much to do. I'm not going to do that. And so the change dies with the managers. So a lot of times change dies with leaders. You have to have leaders on board and they need to know what's in it for them. So at the management level, I always say it's really important to both talk to them as you're creating the program so that they are invested, but also explain to them why this is going to be beneficial for their team and then for their own success. Your team is engaged, they're doing better work. You're going to do better. It's going to make your life easier. I mean, there's reasons, but they need to know and they need to buy in. And another common barrier, especially with these typical change management programs that, um, a lot of management consulting firms use, they try to make it completely top down, where, it's people in a conference room deciding what the culture is going to be and then roll it out without any input from the people. And that's problematic. You always, like I said, we always at Culture Growth start with understanding the current state of the culture, which is different from what you say it is, right? You have to research and get feedback from everybody on what's really happening. Then you take leaders to where they want to be, and then you figure out how to bridge those gaps. And bridging the gaps is the part where you also have to go back to people and talk to them and say, okay, we're at this point, we need to be at this point. We'd like to try this. What do you think about it? Or how do you think we should get people from A to Z? What are some good ideas that would work for your team? Like, you get feedback and input from different people as you build the culture change program so that people are invested from the beginning. And they say, oh, yeah, I talked about that. That was my idea. I said we should have every Friday afternoon off, and they're listening to it. Great. I mean, of course, that's a good one. Everyone's going to like, but anyway, you need to get feedback from a lot of different people. It's got to come at all different levels to have culture change. Leaders have to do what they say. Basically, what we help companies do is to align their values and beliefs with their systems and their rewards and recognition and rituals so that you change the culture that way, right? If all of these things are connected and you're intentional about the message you're sending throughout, then that's going to lead to culture change. But you can't miss a step, and you have to look for where they're contradictory, where maybe again you say you value collaboration, but everybody works in cubicles and closed doors policy. I mean, there's closed doors, there's not time to collaborate. You're not going to have a collaborative office. But if you have some workspaces, maybe you get rid of the cubicles or you have some open areas where people can meet and collaborate, and you encourage that, you allow for times for collaboration to happen, then you're going to have a more collaborative company. So you have to think of all of these things, all the different symbols and rituals and ways that you're teaching your values, and make sure they're intentional in what you want them to be.
I have the impression that very often uh, we forget about something that you say that is quite powerful and impactful. It's a little thing, is that leaders should be on board with the change. And that means not only claiming the change, repeating the change in words, but acting the change. And that is very often forgotten. I still remember certain beautiful stories back in my days in the corporate world. Now, Kristine, I wanted to, it's a little bit of a provocative question because it is a situation that we have only seen recently, and it's about remote work, which is difficult to have like certain historical data from the past because remote work is like new. And it has impacted different organizational cultures. Um, is there any anthropological insight that can help companies navigate with this change? Because believe me, parenthesis, psychologists haven't cracked it yet.
Yeah, so I don't know, honestly. Great question. If there are anthropologists actually studying remote work, which if they're not, I hope there are, that we need to. Um, but I think we can use the same theories and methods and tweak them to apply for remote work. So you can still have rituals. You could do great onboarding. You can have, wonderful team meetings that share the values, or you cannot. You can have people who are just working on their own. They were given a job to do. They do their job every day and they're totally checked out. And I think the latter is happening a lot more than we want it to. So companies with remote workers still have a culture. So if your culture is, we don't ever talk about culture, we don't do team meetings, we don't do team building, we give people their tasks to do and they're supposed to go do it. That's a culture. You have a very individualistic culture, you have a get work done culture. Hopefully you're managing to, productivity, what people are actually doing. We do know, I've heard stories of companies that are tracking, mouse movements and eye clicks, like they're just tracking time in front of computer rather than, yeah, actually accomplishing any kind of tasks. So that's setting up a culture, which is a culture of what? Like, people are being monitored constantly to just prove it that they're sitting in front of a computer. They could be watching anything. I mean, they could be doing who knows what they're doing, playing video games. I don't know, but they're in front of their computer and you can see their eyes are on the computer. Like, we have to really think of what we want. I just think in remote work, you have to be even more intentional about the culture you want to create and figuring out how to have those rituals and to use symbols to send the right message to your team. And, I think it was interesting during COVID seeing different companies try different things where like Zoom happy hours were popular. But I know a case where employees were showing up drunk to Zoom happy hour and it's work hours and people got fired. So okay, that maybe was not a great solution. Or there's different things. Some companies are doing really good at when they start a Zoom meeting, there's some engaging. I don't know about you, but I've been on a ton of meetings where there's what's your one word? How are you feeling when you come into the meeting? And everyone drops in a word. And, just trying to get people to participate a little before the Zoom meeting starts. Those things I think can be helpful, but we're really learning what's going to get people engaged while they're working from home. But there's also a level of how much engagement do we need? Because people are happier working from home, right? They're like, I didn't just spend 3 hours in the car commuting. I'm not in a bad mood. I rolled out of bed. I sit down. I've got my coffee. I'm ready to work. And they're productive and they're getting work done. So there's some natural engagement that I think increases from working from home because you take away some of those external factors and people are in the situation they want to be in rather than having just commuted all day to go to a workplace to sit in front of their computer and do a Zoom meeting in a different location. And that kills engagement. So these, return to office mandates where they're not doing anything to create culture once people get there, um, I really think are going to just have a horrible impact on culture of companies that are doing that. In fact, I just saw an article and I only got the headline, but it was that, oh, I'm going to forget the companies. One of the banks did a return to office mandate and they have lost some of their top performers already to the bank that is letting people stay from home. I feel like it was JP Morgan and Citibank, but I'm not positive. That's going to happen more and more. I believe, the companies that allow remote workers are going to lose their top performers to those companies that still have remote workers So the return to office mandate people are going to lose their top performers. And especially we know that women and other people with disabilities benefit the most from being able to work from home. So they're going to lose those people, which when you lose um your diversity, then you're not going to be as innovative also. Like innovation comes from having a diverse workforce. We have so many statistics that show that. So not only are you losing top performers, you're losing people that add diversity. So I really think these companies that are doing return to office mandates, we're going to see them over time gradually not be able to keep up with the pace of change that's happening in our world right now. We're living in a time of insane change that we've never had before, of how quickly things are changing. And the companies that are going to survive are going to be the ones that have an innovative culture. And innovation doesn't necessarily happen because people are forced to be in the office. I think if you make coming to the office beneficial and you do things to allow and encourage collaboration, then you can have innovation, but you also have to, I think the hybrid environment is going to be the best place where we're not mandating people go 5 days a week, but maybe a few days a week. And you intentionally do the collaborative, innovative things while they're in the office. And all the Zoom meetings occur while people are at home. It just doesn't make sense to make people drive or commute, however they have to commute, to sit in a desk and do the same thing they do at home. And nobody likes that. Nobody's going to be happy about doing that.
I have the impression that there is, in certain countries, I will not name which one, but you will guess it. Certain countries, I mean, it's the power who is a little bit forcing the hands of the standard companies who were on board with the remote work. I still remember, for instance, Deloitte. So I read like 2 days ago that now the more you come to the office, the more you are going to be rewarded with your bonuses. And I also remember that back in the days, they were the ones who had one of the first chief well-being officer, this Jen Fisher, that I have followed most of her podcasts because she's awesome. Now she left, by the way, Deloitte. And these guys now, they feel that complying to the power is something that is going to be beneficial for them. But you are right. In fact, they have already started losing some of the true good people. And I'm going to stop reading any well-being stuff coming from Deloitte because now they
Yeah.
have perverted their message. Really.
Right. Right. And I was talking to someone the other day, and I really think, I mean, well, how long ago was it? 20 years ago, some of the top companies in the world today didn't exist. We didn't know anything about what they were going to do. And I think those top companies that they were innovative and creative and they had great cultures, and now they're shrinking back and they're mandating, you've got to be in the office and you've got to do this and that.
Yeah.
They're allowing room for the next top companies to arise because there's people in their basement working from home, creating the new technologies, doing amazing things with AI or whatever they're using. They're gonna explode. And so I think it's real interesting. It's gonna be interesting to watch. I feel like we're gonna have some maybe our life cycle of these companies is gonna be shorter. Like they grew, they expanded, they did great. And now I don't know why they're digging in, they're pulling back. I do think there's a bit of not a bit, it's a lot coming from power structures and politics and what, like all this pulling back on DEI because that's what we have to do. Um, you're appeasing one person, but you're displeasing a whole lot of people at the same time. So
Ex-
um, yeah, the companies that don't do that kind of stuff, I mean, yeah, it's such an interesting thing. So let's think of like, do you appeal to the masses? Because that's where you're going to get your workers from. That's your purchasers. That's all the people, or do you make the political leaders happy? And I think in the short term, you're going to get some of those companies will get the contracts, maybe, but maybe not. Maybe they all go to the one guy who's getting all the contracts. Like, we'll see.
that's
I think like, oh, who's the I think like Rivian, right? They had a big federal contract or something that, it's probably going to get canceled. And so it doesn't matter what they do about DEI or not. Like we don't know those kind of things. I mean, did we know that? I don't know. I don't know. I go off on the political angle for a long time, but a lot of that is so unknown. I think the best companies are going to be the ones that are keep themselves in a position to be able to innovate and respond quickly to the changes that are coming.
Indeed. I, I'm curious about all the experience that you have got through changing culture. And I wanted to know, do you have like any horror stories about mistakes that companies have done while trying to change culture their way?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I feel like sometimes there's more horror stories than not. I know one company that the owner got very excited about meditation and he thought, this is great, all my people should do it. So their first day back from a holiday, he came in and said, "Okay, everyone needs to start getting to work 30 minutes earlier because we're going to have meditation every day and you will all be here for it starting tomorrow." It is mandated meditation, and that did not go over well at all. Like people were not happy. Suddenly they're driving in the middle of rush hour, rushing to work to be forced to meditate. Some people thought, "Oh, meditation's great." Some people thought, "No, like I don't believe in this. I pray. I do something else. I don't want to do that." And it was like a hardcore mandate. You must now do this. And with zero notice, I mean, it was just rolled out so horribly. And I don't think, this is what I love to use that example because when we're talking about culture and making people happy, meditation is I think it's great. I know not everybody does, but anything that's mandated to adults is not going to be received well. And especially meditation, like that's just it seems like an oxymoron, right? You want to you can't make people meditate. You just can't. Um, so there's that. I worked for one company once and they came to us and said, our biggest problem is our phone where our customer support team and the people who are on the phones and deal with our customers, we have really high turnover. We can't recruit people for this job. They're really costing us a lot of money. What do we do? And we said, okay, well, we're going to do an employee survey and we're going to send it out to everyone. And then we're going to talk to some, do the interviews. And they said, okay, you can do the survey to us, the C-suite, that's great. And we said, no, no, the survey goes out to everyone and we need to talk to these people. And they said, but we don't care what they think. Why do you want to talk to them? I was like, you've solved the problem right there, right? We know what the problem is. You don't care about the people and you're surprised you can't keep them. Um, yeah, and then, there was the company, oil and gas company that talked about safety and safety is so important, safety is so important, but all of their incentives, all their whole bonus structure is focused on production. So if there's a safety incident and you stop production, you're going to lose thousands of dollars as the manager. So the manager doesn't want to stop production for any kind of safety incident because they're going to make less money. So they're incentivizing production over safety. So that's where we have to align these things, right? If you actually value safety, you have to make sure that you're incentivizing safety. So the bonus should be tied to not no incidences, because those incidences are what stop accidents from happening, right? When they shut down because there might be an issue, you want them to be rewarded for shutting down before an accident happens. You don't want people to get rewards for how quickly they solved the accident. You want them to be rewarded for preventing the accident, which is a difficult balance. And it's hard to reward things that didn't happen, for avoiding a mistake. But you got to figure out how to not incentivize production at all costs when you're trying to have safety. Um, yeah, there's just so many. I know another company, I think, who created this wonderful culture change program, and they sent it out to all the managers who are supposed to do things for their teams every month, and the managers just ignore it, and they keep doing it. The company keeps putting out these great culture change things, communications and discussions and activities that are supposed to be done in team meetings every month. And, the management team isn't held accountable. They don't understand why it would be important. So they just ignore it. They just don't do it. So the people on you know, the end don't feel any connection to the company culture. And then another really big problem I'll just mention is we have so many companies now that do employee engagement surveys or some kind of survey.
Hmm.
There are very few that do anything with that data. So you're asking your people to take their time to tell you how they feel, and then you do nothing with it. So the next time the survey comes out, they don't want to take the survey. Like, why should I waste my time? You didn't do anything with the information I gave you last time. So if you're doing surveys and not using the data to do something, you're only hurting your culture. Like even if your response is, "Hey, we had a really good percentage of high response rate, and mostly people are really happy." And there's some issues because there's always some issues. The issues that arose, we're going to dig into more, but at the moment, we can't change those things. We know that we want our wages to be higher. We can't do that until we get production high. Whatever it is, you've got to talk to people about what you learned in the survey, or they're not going to take it again. And your feedback just gets less and less, less, and people get increasingly disengaged because you're not addressing their concerns. So yeah, I think it's it's easier to talk about what companies do wrong. We have so many more examples of what companies do wrong than what companies do right. But there's some cool ones of companies that do really good things too.
Mm. This story about the surveys, I saw it live also back in my days in the corporate. Um, the the thing is that not only sometimes they don't do anything about it, but sometimes they are going to twist the actions that need to be done because nobody has the time to make them happen, or because they think that most of the employees at lower levels are stupid, so that they will
Mhm.
take whatever you throw them. But they
Yeah.
notice, and they are disengaged in the next
Yes.
engagements survey. The other thing that I think that you have highlighted is that sometimes the intention behind the change you want to make is as important as how you're going to make it happen. And I really like this example about doing yoga. I mean, maybe the intention was good, but the way it was the wrong one. And sometimes it is used against employees as, look, we gave them what they wanted. They wanted more well-being, and we want choice. We want
Yes.
it's not what we wanted. To have a well-being, we need to have choices. And really, I find it quite inspiring, enlightening. All of this conversation, Kristine. I think that it is one of these episodes that I'm going to remember because there is a lot of things that I didn't know. And thanks for taking time. Kristine, how do we make it happen if somebody in the audience of this episode wants to reach you out? What is the best way to reach you out?
Probably the best way is on LinkedIn, and I have my full name there. It's Kristine Mackenzie Gentry. Um, or to go to my company is Culture Grove, culturegrove.com. And I would love I always love to talk about culture, as you can tell. I'm very passionate about it, and I can talk about culture all day long. So anyone has questions or wants to learn more, please reach out.
I'm going to be putting both of the links, culturegrowth.com and your LinkedIn profile with the full name, Kristine Mackenzie Gentry, under this specific video. Kristine, thank you very much for taking the time to be with me and to explain me many things that you know.
Well, thank you. I loved chatting with you, and you asked wonderful questions about culture. I'm so glad we got to talk, especially about rituals and symbolism, because we don't talk about that enough. So thank you. It was fun.
Have a great day, Kristine. Lovely to
Thanks.
speak.